I want to kick off today's deep dive with something that really struck me. It's a quote from someone who made it, a successful professional, reflecting on, well, what happened after the big career shift. He said, I had lost my ambition, and with it, my identity. Without CEO status, who was I? If I was not leading a company, what was my purpose? How would I find contentment without that all-encompassing fixation on achievement?
Hmm.
Wow. Hmm. That feeling, right? That unexpected, kind of deep, gnawing dread. It's apparently quite common for people who spent years, maybe decades, running flat out towards financial freedom. You know, we in the FIRE community, we spend so much time optimizing savings rates, debating the 4% rule, crunching all the numbers.
And endless spreadsheets.
Exactly. But we often kind of skip over the toughest variable in the whole equation, ourselves, our own identity.
Sure, and that's what we're diving into today. Most fire discussions, they focus laser-like on the number, right? The magic figure you need to save. That's positioned as the finish line, the ultimate success metric. But what happens when you actually solve the money problem?
Yeah.
And suddenly find yourself staring down a self-worth problem?
Yeah.
That's the core of it. So welcome to this deep dive on Project FIRE. We're going to tackle head-on what I think is a hard truth. That for many of us, especially high achievers, our job title, our status, our income, they become these deeply ingrained proxies for our self-worth.
Right. Conditioned responses almost.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And achieving financial freedom, particularly if you're walking away from a really demanding, high-status career, it doesn't magically undo that conditioning. In fact, it often rips the Band-Aid off, triggering this really profound, sometimes acute sense of loss, maybe even shame or insecurity.
Okay, so let's really unpack this today. Our mission here is to go way beyond the spreadsheets. We want to explore why our work roles get so tangled up with our sense of self. We'll look at that psychological void that can open up post-fire, even if your financial plan was, perfect down to the last penny. And crucially, we want to give you some concrete, actionable strategies backed by psychology for actually engineering a fulfilling post-work identity.
Because the real goal isn't just clocking out early, is it?
Yeah.
It's about achieving a kind of promotion.
Right.
A promotion to a new, intentional life that you design.
I like that framing. A promotion, not just an exit. Okay, let's start with maybe the root of the problem, this identity trap. Think about how we introduce ourselves, right? It's almost automatic. The default small talk opener. So what do? We boil ourselves down to a job title. I'm a software developer. I'm a doctor. I run my own business.
It's more than just a conversational shortcut, isn't it? It's baked into society. Your profession becomes this shorthand for everything. Competence, status, earning potential, even how smart people think you are. And for the kind of driven, high-achieving people often drawn to FIRE, executives, professionals, entrepreneurs, this link isn't just blurry. It often feels completely, utterly inextricable.
It's like the difference between saying, I work at a big law firm versus I'm a partner at the firm. One describes a job, the other feels like it defines the person.
That's exactly it. They don't just have a career. Their career is their identity, their public self, and often their private self-concept, too.
Built on
A whole scaffolding of external validation. Titles, awards, promotions, maybe the size of the team they manage, the deals they close, positive feedback. It creates this really strong sense of self, but strong within that specific corporate or professional world.
So it's strong, but maybe brittle.
Very brittle, yes. Because when you remove that context, the prestigious company name, the CEO title, the whole organizational structure that provides meaning and feedback when that framework disappears, poof, that self-concept is suddenly under catastrophic threat.
All those external markers just become irrelevant overnight.
Totally irrelevant in this new world of unstructured time and, frankly, terrifyingly limitless possibilities.
And that fragility, that's what leads to this post-career vacuum you mentioned, this feeling of detachment, maybe even identity loss, even for people who are incredibly wealthy or achieve massive success.
Yeah, the sources mention Ulysses S. Grant, actually, which is fascinating. After being president, literally the top job, he struggled. Returning to private life, he apparently told a friend, I am now simply Ulysses S. Grant, and I'm trying to get used to it.
Wow, if a two-term president feels that way.
Exactly. Imagine the psychological weight for a type A executive leaving a super demanding corporate role at, say, 45 or 50. That feeling of almost mourning the person you were before you stopped working. It seems pretty universal, no matter how big your bank account is.
You mentioned some research earlier that, honestly, it floored me about the stress level of retirement. We should probably emphasize that.
We absolutely should, because it flies in the face of the retirement dream narrative. The research suggests the stress linked to retiring from a career you're identified with.
Ugh.
It's only slightly less stressful than being diagnosed with a serious illness or even being incarcerated.
Wait, hang on. Retiring early, achieving the fire dream, is almost as stressful as a major health crisis or going to jail. How does that even make sense, especially if you've won the money game?
Because the stress isn't primarily financial, assuming you've hit your number, right?
Yeah.
The stress hits much deeper. It's fueled by those threatened losses we talked about. Identity, sure, but also your community, your colleagues, your whole network often vanishes.
Right.
Your structure, the daily rhythm, the deadlines, the very reason you got up in the morning, and your sense of purpose. These are fundamental psychological needs.
Stuff money can't buy back.
Exactly. Money alone, no matter how much you have, can't magically fill those holes. You can go from feeling essential, the go-to person, to feeling, well, potentially irrelevant almost overnight.
Like that retired investment banker you mentioned. Feeling like they were running toward the edge of a cliff.
Yeah, there's just this vacuum where all those supports, organizational, social, psychological, used to be.
Which brings us right to that challenge of the new narrative. If your whole identity was tied up in doing something, achieving, leading, building, what happens when the doing stops? You suddenly face this incredibly awkward, persistent question. So, what do you do now?
And our research shows this isn't a trivial question for early retirees. Financially independent folks often grapple with real feelings of emptiness, even anxiety, precisely because they suddenly have limitless possibilities. It sounds great, but it can lead to this paralysis, indecision, the paradox of choice, right? So they try out these unsatisfying answers. Oh, I'm an investor now, or I'm focusing on being a full-time parent, or sometimes the really awkward one, I don't really do anything.
And none of those feel quite right, do they?
No, because they don't replace the depth, the structure, the sheer weight of the identity that was lost. They feel flimsy.
So the real struggle isn't just finding any answer. It's deciding which new identity, which new purpose to actually commit to out of this ocean of options. You have all the time in the world, but feel completely aimless.
And here's the kicker, the real paradox for these high achievers. Their ingrained mindset, the very thing that made them successful, now works against them. It's the fear of failure paradox.
Explain that more. How does fear of failure trip up someone who's already proven they can succeed?
Think about it. These are people who built complex careers, maybe businesses. They demonstrated competence, mastery, often at elite levels. But now, faced with something new, something self-directed, maybe a passion project, volunteering, learning a new skill, they get intensely worried that they won't be able to make this next thing a success too.
So the pressure's still there, even if the stakes are lower.
Exactly. And that worry, that fear of not being instantly good at it, often stops them from even starting. It leads to months, sometimes years, of just drifting, indecision, aimless wandering.
It's incredible, isn't it? They conquered the complex world of finance or business, but they're paralyzed by the thought of, I don't know, failing at learning pottery or starting a small community project.
Because the external scorecard is gone? But that internal expectation of high performance, of perfection, often remains deeply ingrained.
It's these mindsets, isn't it? The ones honed over decades in a structured career, suddenly becoming roadblocks in this new, free environment.
Absolutely. We see three big mindset shifts that are critical for navigating this transition successfully.
Okay, what are they?
First, you've got the success mindset. Your whole life, you've probably been benchmarking externally. Income, title, power, maybe who you beat. Everything was measurable, quantifiable.
The scoreboard was clear.
But retirement rips that scoreboard down. Suddenly, you have to shift to internal qualitative measures of success, fulfillment, meaning growth. And frankly, the corporate world probably never asked you to develop those muscles.
That's a huge shift. If my value isn't my salary or my team size anymore, how do I measure it? That feels like a skill I haven't used since. Maybe ever.
It's the central existential question of FIRE, really.
Yeah.
Second is the expert mindset. High achievers, they define themselves by being competent, by knowing things, by solving problems efficiently.
They like being the expert.
Exactly. So now, when they try something new, a hobby, a different field, they have to be a beginner again, a novice. And that feeling of incompetence, of being clumsy and slow in the early stages, it can feel deeply uncomfortable, humiliating even.
I can see that, so they just avoid it.
Many do, yeah. Which leads straight to boredom, maybe withdrawal. They'd rather not try than risk looking foolish or feeling incompetent.
Can you give an example of how that paralysis shows up? Is it just avoidance, or do people actually sort of self-sabotage potential new interests because they're scared of not mastering them quickly?
Oh, it's often active self-sabotage, definitely. Driven by this deep need for consistency with their expert identity. If your whole self-image is built on being the smartest, most capable person in the room, then doing something where you're obviously struggling, that directly threatens that core self-concept. So the paralysis looks like maybe endless research, buying all the best gear for a hobby, but never actually doing it.
Analysis paralysis.
Exactly. Or they might quickly conclude, oh, I'm just not cut out for this. Rather than pushing through that necessary awkward learning phase, they substitute preparation for actual participation. It feels safer.
Okay, so success mindset, expert mindset.
Yeah.
What's the third one?
The third is shifting from the reactor mindset. Decades spent reacting to emails, to crises, to client demands, to the phone ringing off the hook. Hypervigilance, really.
Always putting out fires.
Right. Their whole way of operating was based on responding to urgent external demands. That has to fundamentally shift to a proactive creator mindset. They have to decide what matters. They have to choose their engagement, set their own priorities, define the rhythm of their day, instead of waiting for the inbox to dictate their schedule.
That sounds like forced freedom, which actually sounds terrifying. If you've spent 20 years with your calendar completely dictated by external forces, how do you suddenly decide at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, okay, now I'm going to work on my novel, or whatever the passion project is?
It is terrifying for many, because it demands internal discipline to replace that external pressure. You have to become your own boss, essentially. And sometimes that internal boss is way more lenient or less decisive than the market or your old company ever was.
So the very skills that got you to fire might be the ones holding you back in fire.
In many ways, yes. The transition requires unlearning as much as learning.
Okay, so if the problem is losing that structure, community purpose that our jobs provided, even if imperfectly, then the solution has to be about intentionally rebuilding those things, right?
Exactly. We can't just wave our hands and say, go find some purpose. We need a more structured approach, a kind of psychological blueprint for what makes life feel meaningful outside of work.
And there's research on this.
Oh, yes. Psychologists have spent decades on this, synthesizing ideas from thinkers like Viktor Frankl right up to modern theories from people like Baumeister and Park. They've basically broken down meaningfulness into 6 core psychological dimensions, or needs.
6 pillars of meaning.
You could call them that, yeah. And when you lose a demanding, identity-defining job, each of these pillars takes a hit. So the work of FIRE, the real work, is about consciously understanding these needs and finding new ways to meet them.
Okay, this sounds crucial. Let's break them down. What are these 6 pillars?
All right, they are purpose, value, efficacy, self-worth, mattering, and comprehension. Understanding how losing your job impacts each one. That's basically the roadmap for designing your post-fire life with intention.
Okay, let's start with the big one. Purpose. Feels very Frankl, right? That future orientation.
Absolutely. Purpose, in this sense, means your current actions get their meaning from working towards future goals. Think about it. Your job gave you constant goals, quarterly targets, project deadlines, the next promotion.
Right, a built-in structure for striving.
Exactly. And when the job disappears, poof, that entire goal pursuit structure vanishes overnight. This hits executives, builders, people defined by forward momentum particularly hard. So in retirement, that sense of purpose needs to shift. It often moves away from that sort of infinite growth model of business towards maybe shorter-term, more personal goals, or very commonly in midlife and beyond, towards things like legacy or caring for the next generation.
So if I spent 20 years focused on, say, growing a company, my purpose was tied to that external thing, the company's success. Now, the accountability structure is just me.
Pretty much. You have to replace those external targets, those company goals, with new self-defined ones, even if they don't feel as intense or urgent as the old corporate race. And often, this naturally leads towards what psychologists call generativity.
Generativity.
Yeah, basically caring for and guiding the next generation. Mentoring, teaching, investing in younger people, or the community's future. It becomes a really prominent value and source of purpose for many people in midlife and continues strongly into later years. It's a natural transition from building capital to perhaps building people or community.
That makes sense. Which leads nicely into the second pillar, value.
Right. Values about your core beliefs, what you hold to be right, good, important. These values guide which goals you choose to pursue in the first place.
And work kind of imposes its own values, doesn't it?
It certainly does. Things like efficiency, hierarchy, maybe competition, competence. Post-work, your personal priorities often shift, sometimes dramatically. You might find yourself favoring goals that are more emotionally meaningful. There's actually a theory about this, socio-emotional selectivity theory, or SST.
SST sounds a bit academic. Can you break down what that actually means for someone retiring early?
Sure. SST basically says that as we perceive our remaining time as more limited, whether that happens when you hit 40, 50, or 65, our priorities shift. We become more selective. We tend to move away from focusing on building large networks or acquiring new knowledge just for its own sake.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, we prioritize emotionally satisfying experiences and relationships, deeper connections with close family, trusted friends.
Quality over quantity in relationships and goals.
Exactly. That's why you see many early retirees pivot really hard towards family, or deep community work, or passion projects that have strong emotional resonance. It's a natural cognitive shift. Emotional reward starts to outweigh purely intellectual or status-driven rewards.
So my values might shift from things the market rewards, like income or status, towards more personal things, like authenticity, connection, maybe community impact.
That's precisely the kind of transition we often see. And that drive for generativity we mentioned, that fits right in. Mentoring, teaching, guiding the next generation, these become powerful expressions of those shifting, more emotionally focused values.
Okay, third pillar, efficacy, that feeling of, actually making a difference.
Yeah, efficacy is that sense that you can bring about change, make progress towards goals you value. Losing your job means a sudden stop to your professional impact. You might go from, say, managing a huge budget or leading major projects to, well, managing your household finances.
Which can feel like a massive downgrade in impact.
It can feel profoundly jarring, yes.
Yeah.
That sense of large-scale influence is just gone.
So the key here must be redefining what making a difference actually looks like in this new phase.
Absolutely. Your sense of efficacy has to shift towards maybe more personal, emotionally satisfying pursuits.
Yeah.
You might not be moving the needle on a company stock price anymore, but you could have a huge impact on a mentee's life or help a local charity become much more effective.
Right.
And interestingly, the research suggests that later life well-being is actually more strongly linked to self-efficacy. Your belief that you can make a difference and perceived control, feeling like you're steering your own ship, than it is to the actual objective scale of your impact.
So it's more about feeling effective in your chosen sphere rather than needing that massive external validation.
Exactly. You trade that external, maybe large scale, but often impersonal impact for a more subjective, internal sense of control and meaning in areas you choose.
Okay, let's move to number 4, self-worth. This feels like the absolute core of the issue for many high achievers, right?
It really is often at the heart of it. Self-worth is that deep internal feeling of your own inherent value as a person. Now, while it tends to be fairly stable for most people, it can take a sharp hit during big transitions like retirement, especially early retirement from a high-status role.
Why is it particularly vulnerable then?
Because if your worth has always been tightly tied to external things, the job title, the corner office, the salary, the respect you commanded, losing those external markers can feel like you were losing value, like you were diminished. And this gets amplified by fears around ageism, both external and internalized. Academics even have a term for it. Age-contingent self-worth.
Age-contingent self-worth. So it's not just vanity, it's this underlying fear that as you get older, especially stepping away from a visible career, society sees you as less valuable because your professional output or status is gone.
That's the fear, precisely. If society values me for my utility, and my professional utility seems to be fading, then maybe I am fading too. It's a dangerous internal narrative.
So the psychological work here is huge. It's about learning to cultivate that sense of worth from the inside out, completely detached from status or money.
That's the goal.
Yeah.
It has to come from within. You mentioned that story about the doctor who walked away from a prestigious, high-paying career.
Yeah, that really resonated.
It's a perfect example. They described intentionally shedding the status, the income, the social prestige. Not as a loss, but as a very valuable exercise in personal growth. Their new sense of pride wasn't about high-pressure medical achievements anymore.
It was about.
It came from living intentionally, aligning with their pro-social values, having time for family. It was an internal sense of worth, grounded in who they were, not just what they did. And that kind of worth can't be taken away by a market downturn or corporate restructuring. Sometimes shedding the external stuff is necessary to find the real value underneath.
Powerful. Okay, pillar number 5, mattering. This sounds connected to community, maybe?
Very much so. Mattering is your subjective belief that your life has value and significance in the world. And crucially, it's often strongly linked to feeling like you matter to other people.
Ah, so in a job, even in a big company, your role mattered, right? To the team, to the project's success, maybe to the bottom line.
Exactly. You felt like you were part of something larger, that your contribution counted. In early retirement, especially if you become isolated, there's a real risk of losing that sense of mattering, of feeling irrelevant, not just professionally, but socially too.
So the community aspect we lost comes right back here. How do you replace mattering to, say, a huge organization?
You typically replace it on a different scale.
Yeah.
You sustain that feeling of mattering by getting involved in ways where you can clearly see your impact on others, often in smaller, more intimate settings. Joining a nonprofit board, maybe volunteering regularly where you interact directly with people, doing pro bono work or mentoring.
So you shift from mattering to the corporation to mattering to your community or to specific individuals.
Precisely. It's often a shift from a kind of macro mattering to a more focused micro mattering, which can actually feel more tangible and rewarding.
Okay. And the final pillar, number 6.
Comprehension. This is about coherence, about understand. It's the feeling that your life makes sense when you look back on it, that there's a thread, a narrative.
And how does early retirement challenge that?
Well, when you voluntarily step off a very clear, socially understood career ladder, especially near the peak, you face a big narrative challenge. You need to maintain a sense of self-continuity despite this radical chosen change. If your life story was always, I'm a builder, constantly achieving the next level, how do you make sense of suddenly stopping the build?
Ah, so it's not just about figuring out what to do next. It's about crafting a life story that makes this dramatic shift feel logical, right? Integrating the before and after so it doesn't feel like a failure or a weird break.
Exactly. It's about making the past seem like a necessary preparation for this new, more authentic chapter, rather than an abrupt U-turn or a retreat. And that whole process of crafting and telling your new story, that's actually a key part of the transition itself, which we should probably get into next.
Okay, so this identity shift in FIRE, it's different, isn't it? It's not like a standard retirement at 65, which society kind of understands. There are rituals, expectations, maybe even parties.
Right. It's more like a voluntary career change,
Mm-hmm.
but without the clear structure or social script that usually comes with changing jobs. You're essentially designing your own rite of passage, and society might not immediately get it or validate it.
Which makes the psychological journey maybe more ambiguous, less defined.
Definitely. And researchers who study these kinds of identity transitions, they often model it as moving through 3 distinct stages. Think of it as exploration, then a tricky middle phase called provisional trial or liminality, and finally integration. And the key thing is realizing this isn't instant. It doesn't just happen the day you hand in your notice. It's usually a gradual process, maybe over months or even years, of slowly shifting the balance between who you were and who you might become.
Let's start with phase 1, exploration. How do people even begin to figure out who they might become? How do you test the waters without diving in completely?
It starts with exploring possible selves. These are those mental images of who we could be, the artist, the world traveler, the dedicated volunteer, the involved grandparent. And we start to flesh out these possibilities by subtly changing 3 things: our activities, our relationships, and how we interpret events in our lives.
Okay, let's take activities first. How does that work?
Well, sometimes the change at work itself, a restructuring, a bad project, can make you disillusioned with the old path. But more often, it's the extracurricular stuff that plants the seeds.
Like side hustles or hobbies?
Exactly. Moonlighting, volunteering, really investing time in a serious hobby. These act like temporary, ephemeral roles where you can try on a different identity. Think of the accountant who spends weekends building furniture, slowly realizing that's where the real passion lies. They're testing the appeal, the viability of this maker identity without giving up the day job security.
Right, like you wouldn't quit your high-paying tech job to become a yoga teacher without first teaching classes evenings and weekends for a while, right? You build confidence, see if you actually like it.
Precisely. These small, consistent actions start to chip away at the commitment to the old identity and build belief in the new one. It's learning by doing in a relatively safe space.
Okay, what about the role of relationships in this exploration phase? How important are the people around us?
Hugely important, especially people outside your usual professional bubble, what sociologists sometimes call weak ties.
Why weak ties specifically?
Because your current network, your close colleagues and work friends, they're often invested in you staying the same, right? They know you as the successful executive. You need new people who offer different role models, people who can provide information about alternative paths, and crucially, give you social validation for this emerging different self.
So if all my friends are lawyers, it's hard to imagine myself becoming a baker. But if I join a baking class and meet a former lawyer who's now running a successful bakery.
Exactly. They make it seem possible. They
Yeah.
provide the social proof, the reality check that maybe this crazy idea isn't so crazy after all. They normalize what your current circle might see as weird or even a step down.
And at the same time, maybe loosening ties with the old network is important too.
It can be, yes, because your old network might unconsciously try to keep you locked into that familiar identity. They expect you to act a certain way. You need space to be inconsistent, to experiment, to be a beginner without feeling judged by the people who knew you as the expert.
Makes sense. And the third element was events.
Right. When you read accounts of people making these big voluntary shifts, there's almost always some kind of trigger event, a jolt or a surprise that forces them to stop and reflect.
Like what kind of events?
Could be anything, really. Serious burnout, a health scare, maybe getting laid off even if you secretly wanted to leave anyway, or sometimes even a big success that makes you realize, okay, I climbed the mountain, but is this the right mountain?
Like Rachel, the coach you mentioned, who said burning out was the best thing that happened because it finally gave her permission to leave the corporate world.
Exactly. These events tend to crystallize vague feelings of dissatisfaction. They challenge your old assumptions like, maybe I can handle any amount of stress, and they motivate you to do the hard work of rethinking your identity. They often become the turning point in your story, legitimizing the decision to yourself and others.
Okay, so you explore, you test things out, but then comes the really uncomfortable part, right? That middle phase, liminality or provisional trial. This sounds like where people get stuck.
It absolutely is. Liminality literally means threshold, being betwixt and between. You're stuck in the doorway. You're no longer fully the person you were, the high-flying exec, but you haven't fully become the new person, either the purposeful retiree, the artist, whatever it is.
Sounds like limbo.
It feels like limbo. People describe it as being in a vacuum, floating in midair,
Yeah.
sometimes like living inside a hurricane. There's this really acute identity conflict playing out internally between the successful, known, comfortable self you were and this uncertain, desired, maybe fragile future self you're reaching for.
And that conflict gets worse when you think about what you're giving up.
Definitely. You start to really feel the weight of the side bets, all the non-monetary things tied to the old job, the security, the status, the routine, the colleagues, maybe even just the easy answer to what do you do. The golden handcuffs aren't just financial.
Right.
And people find themselves just oscillating back and forth, sometimes daily, even hourly. Should I stick with what I know versus can I really make this leap into the unknown?
The problem is, those two selves aren't really comparable, are they? The old identity has decades of proof behind it, tons of validation. The new one is just an idea, an aspiration. It feels flimsy in comparison.
Which makes committing to the new one feel incredibly risky, terrifying even. And that leads us to a really important coping mechanism or management technique for this liminal phase, something called identity buffering.
Identity buffering. Okay, what is that exactly? How can people listening actually use this?
Think of it as creating a protected space for your new identity to grow, shielded from the demands and expectations of your old established identity. It's about setting boundaries in time, space, and relationships.
Like a safe zone for experimenting.
Exactly, like creating a little greenhouse for a delicate seedling. The idea comes from developmental psychology. You create a boundary where the usual rules don't apply, where you can try things out, play with a new identity, without risking total failure or sanction if it doesn't work out immediately.
Okay, give me some concrete examples. How does this buffering look in practice for someone transitioning towards fire or post-fire?
Well, taking a sabbatical is a classic temporal buffer, right? A fixed period away to try out a new lifestyle. Or maybe returning to school part-time that carves out dedicated time and space. Even just rigidly protecting certain times, say every Tuesday evening, is dedicated to your writing project. No exceptions. That's a temporal buffer.
So you're containing the experiment.
Yes, you're allowing yourself to violate the rules of your old identity. For example, not being productive in a corporate sense, but only within those defined limits. It lets you try things on without the pressure of permanence. You know you can retreat back to the safety of the old role if needed. It protects the fragile new identity from being crushed by the competence and demands of the old one.
Okay, and what about relational buffering? How does that work?
That's where those guiding figures we touched on earlier come in. These are supportive people, maybe mentors, coaches, or friends who get what you're trying to do. They provide the psychological safety net. They act as a safe audience. You can talk to them about your tentative plans, your fears. You can try out saying, I'm thinking of becoming a pair. Without worrying, they'll judge you for being inconsistent or unrealistic. They offer encouragement, maybe practical advice, and help you interpret confusing feelings. They're the sounding board for rehearsing your new identity before you take it public.
That makes a lot of sense. Creating these safe spaces, both in time and relationships, seems critical to actually surviving that difficult middle phase. And look, since you are taking the time right now to invest in this, to really understand the deep psychological work involved in redefining yourself, navigating this tricky liminal stage, well, we'd really appreciate it if you could take a second to like this video. Maybe share it with someone else you know who's wrestling with these questions, especially if they're feeling that gnawing dread we talked about.
Yeah, chances are you know someone.
And of course, subscribe to Project Fire for more deep dives like this one. Make sure you hit that bell icon too so you don't miss our future explorations into life after financial independence.
Okay, let's keep going. We need to move out of this uncomfortable betwixt and between phase.
Right out of the hurricane.
And into the final stage. How do we actually integrate this new self?
Okay, so all this exploration, all this provisional trial and buffering, it's all leading towards phase 3. Integration. Making the new identity feel coherent and permanent.
And you mentioned earlier that a huge part of this is crafting a story, a transition narrative.
Absolutely. That's the final crucial psychological piece. Because as we said, this kind of voluntary early departure isn't socially scripted. It can look like quitting or failing or running away to people who don't understand fire.
You need a good explanation.
You need a powerful story, mainly for yourself, but also to explain it convincingly to others, a narrative that makes the whole journey make sense. Especially if you left at what looked like the peak of your career, that ambiguity really invites questions and skepticism. So what makes a good transition narrative? What does it need to do?
2 key things, according to the research on life stories. It needs to establish causality and demonstrate self-continuity.
Okay, causality means showing why it happened.
Yes, often by hinging the story on a specific turning point, that jolt or event we talked about earlier. Everything changed after X happened. And self-continuity means showing that this seemingly radical change isn't actually a break from who you fundamentally are.
Ah, so even though it looks like a huge discontinuity stopping a high-powered career, the story needs to frame it as being consistent with some deeper, maybe previously hidden aspect of yourself?
Precisely. You need to show that this change was, in a way, inevitable, that it aligns with your core values, the person you always were underneath the corporate persona.
Can you give an example of how someone might reframe that? How do you turn what looks like quitting into a strategic move forward?
Well, instead of the simple story, I quit because I hated the stress or I just couldn't take it anymore, the more powerful narrative might be something like, my success in that demanding career actually taught me what I truly value. Maybe it's creativity or autonomy or making a different kind of impact. And I realized the corporate ladder, while useful for a time, was ultimately preventing me from fully pursuing that core value. So leaving wasn't a retreat. It was a necessary strategic step towards a more authentic life.
So the narrative makes the exit feel purposeful, coherent, like an advancement into something, not just away from something.
Exactly. And telling this story, refining it, sharing it with different people, new friends, potential collaborators, people in your community, that act of telling and retelling actually helps you internalize and solidify the new identity. The story literally becomes the structure, the architecture of your new self.
Okay, we've been through the psychology, the why it's so hard, the stages of transition, the need for a new story. Now, let's get really practical. How do people actually do this? How do you move from that reactive mindset we talked about, always responding to external demands, to becoming the proactive creator of your new life and filling that identity gap?
All right, let's pull together some concrete, actionable strategies. Based on the experiences of people who've successfully navigated this, who've turned that initial freedom shock into genuine fulfillment, we can identify about 8 key steps.
8 steps. Okay, let's hear them. What's number 1?
Strategy 1, keep one foot in. part-time or pro bono work. Now, this might sound a bit weird for retire early, right?
Yeah, seems counterintuitive. Keep working.
But it's often a crucial psychological bridge, especially in the beginning, precisely because of the identity piece we've been discussing. Many early retirees find that continuing some form of work, consulting, part-time projects, meaningful pro bono stuff really helps.
How does it help?
It mitigates that immediate, sharp loss of identity. It provides continued structure, a sense of purpose, and keeps you socially engaged, but ideally without the all-consuming pressure and lack of control of the old job.
Yeah.
The key difference is the motivation.
Yeah.
It's driven by fulfillment and purpose now, not financial necessity.
Okay, but how do you make sure this keeping one foot in doesn't just become, well, recreating the old stressful life? Or just delaying the identity crisis? If I take a high-paying consulting gig that feels just like my old job, am I really building something new?
That's a critical distinction, you're right. The people who do this successfully maintain absolute control. It's about the quantity and, more importantly, the quality of the work they choose to do.
Can you give examples?
Sure. Permjot, who kind of stumbled into financial independence, he pivoted to leadership advisory and mentoring, but mostly pro bono. His joy came from developing others, not the paycheck. He said he's barely done what feels like real work in years. Rachel, the coach, she picks online projects that specifically align with her values of freedom. Abel became what he calls a location-independent portfolio careerist, carefully balancing some consulting with non-executive roles he finds meaningful. The income is secondary. The control over their time and the impact they feel they're having, those are primary drivers.
Okay, so control is key. What's strategy number 2?
Strategy 2, focus on intrinsic motivation. This means fundamentally shifting why you do things.
Oh, so?
Stop choosing activities just because they're adjacent to your old skills. Well, I was good at managing projects, so I guess I'll consult on project management. Instead, dig deeper. Choose activities based on what genuinely energizes you, what makes you lose track of time, what feels inherently interesting or meaningful, regardless of external reward.
So it requires real introspection.
Deep introspection, yes. The engagement should align with your core values and maybe skills you want to develop, not just ones you already have. And again, you need to maintain control over how you engage. It's the difference between doing what you feel you should do or what you can do versus doing what you feel you must do to feel truly alive and engaged.
All right. Strategy number 3.
Strategy 3, find your skill, something else. This is about actively recognizing your career was never your entire identity, just the part that got the most attention.
So you need to consciously build up other parts.
Yes, you need to find or maybe rediscover a positive, constructive pursuit outside of anything resembling work, something you can pour energy and identity into, something demanding, ideally, where your progress feels entirely dependent on your effort, not external factors like market conditions or office politics.
What kind of things are we talking about?
The sources give great examples. It could be intensely focusing on family relationships. It could be a demanding physical hobby. One person mentioned their progress in historical European martial arts, HEMA, and pointed out, look, how good I get at this is 100% down to my practice and dedication. Unlike my old job, which was subject to all sorts of external forces, this something else needs to provide that feeling of measurable accomplishment, mastery, positive reinforcement, all the psychological rewards that maybe only work used to provide.
Right, replacing those rewards. Okay, number 4.
Strategy 4, practice retirement. This sounds simple, maybe even obvious, but it tackles that emotional preparedness gap.
How do you practice retirement?
Because people get so focused on the financial side, saving and investing, they often completely neglect the emotional and practical preparation for having huge amounts of unstructured time. So the advice is, use your vacation time, take a sabbatical if you can, maybe even structure mini retirements before you pull the plug completely.
To do what?
To actually experiment. Try out different routines, different hobbies, different ways of structuring your day. See what actually brings you joy and fulfillment when you're not working. It helps you identify potential problems or gaps in your plan, like realizing, wow, all my friends are work friends. Or, I actually hate having nothing scheduled before you're facing permanent freedom.
So you debug your retirement plan before launch.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A perfect financial plan without a tested, coherent life plan is actually incomplete, maybe even setting you up for that post-fire shock.
Good point. Okay, strategy 5.
Strategy 5, build a new structure. This is crucial for high achievers.
Because they're used to structure.
They're used to structure, deadlines, maybe even time scarcity. Suddenly having endless empty time can feel deeply disorienting, anxiety-provoking. It leads to that aimless feeling. So you need to proactively build a new structure.
What does that look like?
It might involve some proactive annual planning. What do I want to achieve this year? It definitely involves creating positive daily or weekly routines, non-negotiable habits. The focus has to shift from time management, where time is this scarce thing you sell or optimize, to time sovereignty.
Time sovereignty, meaning?
Meaning time is now this abundant resource that you control and use intentionally. You have to become the creator and enforcer of your own schedule, setting your own goals and deadlines that replace the old external pressures. So maybe instead of that mandatory 9 a.m. Monday meeting, you create a non-negotiable 9 a.m. Monday slot for your creative project, and you treat it with the same importance.
Got it. Discipline shifts from external to internal. Number 6.
Strategy 6. Seek community and support. Don't underestimate the isolation factor.
Why is isolation so common?
Because your situation financially independent, but maybe feeling adrift identity-wise is pretty unique. Most of your old friends, your family, they're likely still on the traditional work path. They might not fully understand what you're going through.
So you need to find your tribe.
You absolutely need to actively find like-minded people. That might mean seeking out peer support groups. There are some specifically for post-exit entrepreneurs, for example. Or consciously cultivating relationships with other early retirees or people pursuing unconventional paths.
Yeah.
And definitely lean on supportive friends and family who do get it and can validate your new direction.
And professional help.
Yes, don't discount professional help. A therapist or coach can be invaluable here. They can help you unpack the complex emotions, understand the thought patterns holding you back, and develop concrete coping strategies for managing the stress of this major identity shift.
Okay, 2 more. Strategy 7.
Strategy 7. Challenge internalized critics. This goes right back to that self-worth issue being tied to performance.
How do we challenge those inner critics?
High achievers often have this tendency to internalize any criticism of their work. A project didn't go well, sales were down, as criticism of themselves as a person. The first step is recognizing this pattern. Remember the mantra. Thoughts are not facts, especially those harsh, self-critical thoughts. They're often distortions, rooted in those old, maybe unrealistic expectations of constant perfection. A clinical psychologist, Sabrina Romanoff, suggests using those moments when your self-worth takes a hit. Use them as data.
Data?
Yeah. Ask yourself, what insecurity is this situation triggering in me? What underlying fear is coming up? Instead of just beating yourself up, use it as an opportunity for deeper self-understanding and growth. Turn the perceived failure into a learning moment.
So failure becomes feedback, not a verdict on your worth.
Exactly. When your core sense of self isn't totally dependent on your performance in one area, you can actually hear constructive feedback, learn from mistakes, and adapt without getting defensive or spiraling. It builds resilience.
Okay, and the final one, strategy number 8.
Strategy 8. Measure success differently. This is really the culmination of the whole mindset shift.
Moving away from the external scoreboard.
Completely. You have to consciously dismantle that old system based on titles, money, external validation, and replace it with internal intrinsic measures of a life well lived. Dr. Romanoff actually suggests focusing on 2 key intrinsic metrics.
What are they? They need to be resilient metrics, right?
Things that can't easily be taken away. First, measure your success by the amount you are learning. Are you growing? Are you developing new skills, new understanding? Learning correlates directly with personal growth and building expertise, and that's something nobody can take away from you, regardless of external circumstances.
Okay, well, learning. What's the second one?
Second, measure success by the impact you are making. And impact here isn't just financial results. It's the positive effect you're having on your community, maybe on your family, on individuals you mentor or help, on causes you care about.
Learning and impact.
When you shift your focus to measuring your life by how much you're learning and the positive impact you're making, you naturally transition from living a life that's purely resume-ready to one that is eulogy-ready.
Eulogy-ready. I like that. It puts it all in perspective.
Doesn't it? And for people still working, maybe not even aiming for early retirement, but just wanting a healthier relationship with work now, it comes down to realizing your job is fundamentally a transaction. It's a way to get resources to fund the life you want. Do it well. Be professional, but learn to leave it at the office psychologically. Focus your core energy on building that eulogy-ready life, reflecting your true values, not just the demands of the job. Hashtag track outro.
Wow. Okay, so today we really went deep into arguably the hardest part of FIRE, didn't we? Decoupling your identity from your paycheck, from your career. We've seen that achieving financial independence, it solves the money problem, sure,
Yeah.
but it often just unmasks this deeper identity problem.
Mm.
We've covered just how challenging that can be, explored that psychological framework, those 6 pillars of meaning: purpose, value, efficacy, self-worth, mattering, and comprehension. And we mapped out that tricky transition process, navigating through that uncomfortable, confusing liminal state.
And the core message really is about making that fundamental shift in self-definition. Moving from primarily defining yourself by what I do to defining yourself by who I am, by your values, your relationships, your impact.
Yeah.
Retirement, especially early retirement, shouldn't be seen as an ending or a decline. It's a massive opportunity. Challenging, yes, but an opportunity for real personal growth, for intentionally designing a life that truly reflects who you want to be. The goal isn't just to stop working, it's to, as one source put it, wind up the clock again. But this time, have it ticking according to your chosen rhythm. Embracing the journey with maybe realistic optimism and a sort of relaxed determination.
Realistic optimism and relaxed determination. I like that.
Yeah. And maybe for those listening who are still on the path towards FIRE, think about this. That highly structured professional life, it often crowds out time and energy for other things that you value deeply. So the identity work, the decoupling, it doesn't have to wait until you hit your number. You can start now. So let's leave you with a final thought to mull over. Building on that idea of identity buffering we discussed, what boundaries, maybe temporal, spatial, or relational, can you consciously create this week to start buffering and protecting an emerging part of your identity, a passion, a different way of being, before you find yourself desperately needing it to be your whole identity? Start practicing your freedom, even in small ways, right now.
Find those boundaries. Start exploring that new identity. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive on Project FIRE. We'll see you next time.